What's up, Gear Junkies? So, today I'm going to be talking about something a little bit different. So, it's really not that heavy, is my new Gretched. Gretch? Gretched? Gretch? Uh, I'm from New York, but I live in Florida, so Gretch, I'll go with that. Gretch, hollow body electric with Filtertrons. Pretty excited about it. Just picked this up yesterday, and there will be a review on this sucker coming real soon. But something that I wanted to talk about a little bit today. So you go to the store, you buy a new guitar, and you think it's pretty much ready to play, right? Wrong. So this is a used guitar, actually, but the same story applies for both new and used. The key is that guitar stores and guitar companies, especially for more budget brand guitars, and this is a budget type guitar, it's $500 or so. They don't do a whole lot of work other than just sort of the basic finishing, painting it, putting on the strings, but they don't do a whole lot to make these guitars real playable. That's one of the things that separates a budget guitar from, say, my wherever it is on the wall there, American Strat. The American Strat, obviously, Fender has put quite a bit of time into it. Human time. A lot of these things are made on CNC machines, which has improved quality overall because it's much more consistent. But the downside to that is that they are also a little more fickle because there's less time by a human spent making sure everything is perfect. The frets are crowned and leveled, the nut is cut properly, etc., etc. So what I thought I would do, since this is a new guitar, just came home from the store last night, I thought I would take you on a journey through what I do whenever I get a new guitar. So we're going to change locations because my office is not where I do my guitar setup. I actually do it in the living room. I have an ottoman on my couch, and I lay the guitar on the ottoman because it's a nice stable platform and it's also padded, so I don't have to worry about scratching or denting anything on the guitar. And it's comfortable. So that's where we're going to go next. So let's step over there. All right. So, excuse me for not looking at the camera a whole lot. I really am going to be taking this as a setup from scratch. So, like I said, I got this used. It's a little dirty, not too bad. Um, Really not too many scuff marks or anything like that. Of course, I checked out all the electronics in the store, and they all felt pretty good. I have never had a guitar with a Bigsby before, so this might be an interesting part of setup. I've also never had a bridge that can be removed. And although some guitars like this have a bridge with posts so that it's easy to replace, I'm not sure if this one does. So if the bridge falls off, it might be a challenge to get back in place. So just something to keep in mind there. Unfortunately, this does not have locking tuners, which I always prefer. And if I keep this guitar long term, I probably will upgrade those. The Bigsby is the kind where the arm is movable, which I really do like. If you've never played with a Bigsby, which really I haven't until yesterday either, it allows you to bend up and down, which is kind of nice, almost like a Floyd Rose. One of the downsides, though, is these guitars are kind of notorious for tuning problems, especially the G. So we're going to make sure that the nut is cut really well, that I put some lube in the nut, and this might be a good candidate for a string butler, which I'll talk about a little bit later on. All right, so first things first, going to pull off the strings. Oh, I wanted to mention, I have like these little Tupperwares. Now, this doesn't have everything that I might need for a setup, but it's kind of the general stuff. I've got, extra picks and stuff like that, which is whatever. But I got an old nut in there in case I need it. X-Acto knife, pair of wire cutters, um, blue painter's tape, which you'll see is pretty valuable to have. Some lint. Uh, my Capo, which although I use it when I'm playing, I also use it when I'm doing a setup. I have a radius gauge set, springs for Fender tremolos, a universal multi tool with like 6 or 7 different types of hex ends, Allen keys, some sandpaper, just sort of some general stuff in there. And then in my other bin, some guitar strings, regular and uncoated and coated. This is just like a little piece of cabinet liner. I like this if I'm doing something where there's a lot of movement. It'll actually keep that from moving. So I just keep a little strip in there. A sanding block. Now this won't be used on this guitar because there's binding. But this is what I use if I want to roll the edges of the fretboard. Just run it along the sides real gentle, and it rolls the edges. I also keep some playing stuff in here, like this is my glass slide. String winder, another hex set. So when you work on guitars, you tend to accumulate things like this. Important. This is fretboard oil. And this is nut lube. And then again, some washers. And then the nut lube applicators. And yes, every time I say nut lube, I want to laugh, but it is what it is. So, all right, I'm going to remove the strings. Now, normally if I were just changing the strings, I wouldn't actually pull them all off at the same time. But because I'm not actually just changing the strings, I'm going to actually be working on the fretboard itself. I will be doing more than just, I will pull them all off at the same time. One of the things I really like about this little winder, and they make electric ones that are, fancy. If I were doing hundreds of guitars, maybe I'd buy one, but it does make it just a little bit faster sometimes to take off the strings. Just saves a little bit of wrist energy. Whoever owned this before me, totally overwound the strings. Some of these are they didn't cut them; they just basically put the entire length of string on the guitar. Which, I guess there's nothing wrong with that, but it does decrease tuning stability. So when you're restringing a guitar, you probably want to think about cutting your strings to where you get about 2-3 winds on each post. So this is way more than that. Also noticing that the nut looks like it has a little bit of graphite in it, which is sort of I won't say a poor man's, but kind of the ghetto way of adding a little bit of string lube to the nut. While in some cases graphite is just fine. I live in Florida, and so there's a lot of humidity, and oftentimes graphite and humidity cause additional binding problems. So what you're trying to solve by adding graphite actually doesn't get solved and may make it worse. So that is why I put a hole in my finger. That is why I always actually use proper string lubricant. Another way to help solve the problem, especially on these headstocks that are 3x3 side by side, like Gretsch's, Gibson's, Epiphones, they're all similar in that situation. PRS is a 3x3, but the way PRS cuts their headstock, it actually causes the same problem. But any guitar that has a wide splay angle on the guitar strings, there's always an issue with tuning stability, especially if you add a tremolo. So in this case, boy, this was strung weird. Okay, so yeah, I tend to use a string Butler if I have a guitar that has a wide splay headstock like this. And what that does is basically just keeps the angle through the nut straighter, so it's not coming off at an angle, because that angle will often be where the strings bind, and that's what causes tuning instability. All right, so my old strings, I always cut in half, if I can. And the reason I do that is twofold. One, the parts of the string that have gone through the tuners are all gnarly, and I don't want them to be ripped through, causing scratches on the body. So having a clean end by cutting it is nice, but also it'll keep me from accidentally reusing the old strings, which is, a problem. So, all right. I also try and see, they're up. That's good to see. All right. So the bridge just fell off like I predicted it might, but in this case, it's no big deal because it actually has the posts I was talking about. So I'll show you that in a second. This is actually interesting. I'm doing a string change slash setup on a guitar that I've never done this before on. So we're going to be learning a little together as we go, which is not a bad thing. All right, so these are my old strings. I tie them together in just a little, simple knot, just so I know never to put them back on anything. They'll go in the trash. All right. So with a Bigsby, unlike a Fender tremolo, where the strings go through the body and connect to the back of the guitar, on a Bigsby they actually connect up front, so there's no routing through the body. And the reason that's important to know is because some strings won't work with a Bigsby. So in this case, the Bigsby has posts where the string connects to and goes around. And so these strings here, you see I have a little bead with the hole. Fender makes guitar strings that have a bullet shape at the end. Those won't work on here because there's no hole for them to go through. So something to keep in mind. I'm going to put a set of D'Addarios on. These are coated strings. I buy them by the 3-pack. It saves a little bit of money, and it means I always have strings, so it's good to have. So D'Addario strings. What I was saying before about the bridge, it fell off. Not a big deal. The beautiful thing is this bridge has the 2 posts I was talking about. So if you see there are 2 pillar posts. And fortunately, whoever owned this wrote pick on one side, which I will just always know is going to be the high E side. So they just sit back into their slots like that, and then the Tunematic goes on top. That's it. Pretty easy. All right, the reason I took all the strings off at first instead of just doing it one at a time is because I want to condition the fretboard. When I'm buying a guitar used especially, but new is just the same, I like to always condition the fretboard. This actually looks like it's in pretty good condition. In fact, it's in very good condition, which is pretty unusual, especially for a used guitar. I'm guessing whoever owned this either knew what they were doing or didn't play it a whole lot and kept it in a good climate-controlled environment. This is not so much of a problem in where I live in Florida, but if you live up in the Pacific, well, in anywhere that's drier, so basically west of the Rockies, where you have much drier climate, your fretboard will dry out. I mean, we're at like 80% humidity all the time here in Florida, so even in the house, our air conditioners can really only get it down to about 60%, 50, 60% humidity. But if you live out in the desert or in the Pacific, living out there, you will absolutely have more issues with fretboards drying. But regardless, it doesn't hurt anything, and it is a good practice. So I like this Music Nomad F1 oil, but you can use, there's a whole bunch of different brands out here, and this will clean and condition the fretboard, keep it good. I like to do this about once a year. All right, so before I actually use this cloth to put oil on, I'm just going to take a quick wipe over the guitar, take off any fingerprints. This is easier to do when there's no strings on it because I can easily get between the pickups and around the pick guard, and I'm going to take that bridge back off again and just wipe over it. Obviously, with a gloss finish like this, it's inevitable that there's going to be a lot of fingerprints. But anything I can take off when I'm just doing a setup like this it's nice to have, a nice newer feeling guitar, not covered in fingerprints and all that. So, and there's all sorts of different guitar polishes out there on the market. If you're trying to improve a finish that's been abused, they sell all different kinds of things out there. But for something in this good a condition, again, either really well taken care of and babied or not played very much, just a clean, low lint cloth is pretty much all you'll need. And the answer is yes, I do this to every single one of my guitars, every single time I buy one, especially if I'm buying a used one. Once you get through all this, and you can take as long or as little time as you want, for the sake of brevity on this video and not having you watch me wipe off every single dust and fingerprint on the planet on this guitar, which in a normal situation I would, we're going to move on to doing the fretboard. In the past, I actually used to use the oil that they sell with butcher block, like cutting boards, because it's food grade, but it's not a vegetable or anything like that. It's an actual mineral oil. But since then, I've actually switched to the Music Nomad F1 oil. I find it works great, easy to apply. So basically, I just do a little squiggle on the frets. Now this one's got large block inlays. So the frets that have the block inlays, I'm actually gonna skip. And what I'm gonna do is I'll use the residue that's on the cloth to apply some extra oil, because I don't really want to oversaturate the abalone or whatever is actually on the fret. So that's it. You just put it on there. Don't get it on your arm like I just did, and then just rub it on. Okay, through the magic of television, I'm just gonna go back through and wipe down. Now, I'm pretty thorough when I do this part, primarily because I don't want my fretboard to feel greasy. The wood will absorb most of that moisture, but just no reason to cut corners. I actually did this for a friend of mine's guitar back over in February, and he had never conditioned the fretboard. So it was a guitar bought in like 1999 or 2000. Fretboard had never been conditioned, and the fretboard literally soaked in 3 applications of fret oil before it was just sitting on top and looked like it was good to go. So if you don't do this, it will eat a lot more oil. Like I said, this guitar was in pretty good condition, so it didn't really look like it needed a whole lot. But depending on how often you've done this, or if ever, you could end up going through quite a lot of fret oil. I like to wipe both with and across the grain, just to make sure I get up everything that's excess. You're not trying to soak it in oil, you're just trying to give it a little bit of moisture. All right. Now this cloth is not good for wiping the guitar down because it's got oil on it. It will just leave oil nastiness everywhere. So that towel goes into the wash. All right. Next step is to polish the fret wire. And this fret wire is looking pretty decent, actually. I will just do this more for demonstration purposes than actually needing a full polish. So these protect your frets. Pretty simple. They just go over the fret like that. I have a couple of different sizes based on the size of the fret that the guitar has, if it's a jumbo or super jumbo or regular fret. This is 5,000 grit sandpaper. I would actually typically start lower than this, but these actually are in pretty good shape, so I won't go down to raw metal and then work my way back up. You can see this has been used actually probably twice already. So again, if I were doing this and the guitar really truly looked like it needed a fret job, I would go get new sandpaper. I buy it by the sheet and just cut as I need. But it's really straightforward. You just kind of cover it and then polish. And that's it. And just keep going down the line. You're not trying to reshape, you're really just pulling off any of the oxidation that gets built up on the frets over time. Your fingers have oils and moisture and all that, and especially if it's not a stainless steel fret, like these are not stainless steel, they definitely get oxidized. I've seen people do this with um, Scotch Brite pads, the white ones specifically. You can also do this with um, steel wool. The downside with steel wool is those little metal flakes come off and they get into your pickups because your pickups are magnets. So I don't recommend that, especially on a guitar that has a glued on neck or a set neck. So normally, if I'm doing this on a bolt-on neck, like a Fender Stratocaster, I'd actually take the neck completely off the guitar to do this. It makes it a whole lot less unwieldy because it's just the neck instead of the neck plus the guitar, so I don't have to worry so much about dinging the guitar as I'm moving around. Um, it just sort of makes the process a whole lot easier. A lot of people are afraid about pulling the neck off of a guitar, but as long as you're careful, it's totally fine. It's not going to hurt it. It's actually what Leo Fender intended when he designed the original Stratocasters and Telecasters was that it would be easy for folks if a component broke. Instead of needing a new guitar, you just replace the neck. So it was made to be interchangeable, and so therefore, it's pretty sturdy. We don't do it weekly, but you can take the guitar apart quite a few times before really, I think, causing any real damage as long as you're careful. With the exception, of course, as long as you're also using a screw bit that's the right size, because you can strip those screws and then you're in real trouble. So as you can see, it's just a pretty fast process. Um, this is just really, like I said, polishing. Now, if you were needing to do a more detailed fret job, I actually use my Dremel. I have a polishing wheel on my Dremel, and I'll put a little bit of polishing compound and run my Dremel across the frets. And boy, that'll make them gleam. But the problem is the Dremel's not real precise. So in that situation, I'll actually tape off the whole fretboard. That's what that painter's tape is for. I would actually go across every single space in between the fret wire and tape it off so that I couldn't accidentally slip and take a chunk out of the wood, which, especially at a higher RPM, the Dremel is certainly capable of damaging your fretboard. So if you're uncomfortable with that, the hand method may be a little slower, but it certainly does the trick. And if you have more nasty frets or frets with dings and dents in them, where you feel it really needs to be like deeply cleaned or polished, then you would just start with a lower grit sandpaper, say 1,000 or 800 even, and work your way up. Now, I haven't tried it, but Stu Mac, which is a guitar parts supply company, I'm sure most of you know that. Stu Mac makes fret erasers. I haven't tried them before, but they look really cool. They're just basically like pencil erasers, but they have a grit in them. And so you just basically do what I'm doing, except for using an eraser. So it's kind of a little more ergonomic than folding up a piece of sandpaper. Okay, so you'll notice that all of a sudden I'm switching to a smaller guard, and that's because the frets get closer together as you get higher up on the fretboard. So it's not that there's anything different about it, it's just that it's smaller because the frets are closer together. So the only part to this is as you get higher on the fretboard, I tend to be a little more careful just because this is where you can make more of a mistake and unintentionally damage the wood. I'm using 5,000 grit sandpaper, so it's pretty gentle to begin with, but anything you can do to avoid scuffing up the wood on your guitar is a good thing. So just something to think about as you get closer to the end of the fretboard. In the comments below, tell me if you would like to see me do a full fret job on a guitar. I'd be happy to do one. It does take quite a lot of time. It's pretty time intensive, but the results are usually pretty good. So I'm going to take that towel again that has a little bit of that oil on there and just wipe off the guitar because, as you can see, my fingers are black from the metal. It's just oxidation and a little bit of the fret wire. I just don't want that to get on my fingers after today. So by wiping the frets afterwards, it'll keep them a little cleaner. That's all. All right. All right. One other tool I didn't mention, but I find really indispensable, not required, but highly recommended, is just this little electric screwdriver. I think it just makes life a lot easier, especially when you're working on something like a Stratocaster where you got to take off all those screws from the pick guard. In this case, really the only thing I want to do is take off this truss rod cover. And this is really in anticipation of needing to putting on lighter screws. So probably having to do a truss rod adjustment. Anytime you change the gauge of strings, whether it be to heavier or to lighter strings, you'll have to adjust the truss rod. The tension, of course, changes based on the gauge of string. So a lighter string will cause the guitar tension to reduce, and therefore the neck will bow a little bit more. And so you'll need to tighten the truss rod or vice versa. So I haven't actually taken this off before, and it looks like it's in pretty good shape. Probably not even touched by the previous owner. Um, Although I'm not sure, because it actually does look like this might be an aftermarket nut, which to me is a good thing. It's a little bit not quite matching. It's more of a gray color than a white color, and so I get the impression that that's probably something from Tusk or Graphtec, like a Graphtec nut. So not complaining there, just because it'll probably will improve the string tuning stability. And the cuts look pretty good. We'll know more once we get a little further down the road. Um, but all that being said, I'm going to go ahead and start putting strings on. Now, when I'm doing this with a traditional guitar, like a Telecaster, Stratocaster, even a Les Paul, I will actually flip the guitar over, take apart the back end, make sure everything looks good in the components underneath, make sure the wiring looks good. And then I'll take off the entire pick cover and I'll use electrical grounding paint or grounding electrical tape. It's copper tape to properly ground the cavity of the pickups, and that really does make things quieter, especially with single coils. But this is all kind of a little bit different since these are technically humbuckers. They're Filtertrons, but they're humbuckers. They should be a little bit quieter to begin with, and then obviously there's no cavity for me to take apart. And I don't know enough about solid or semi-hollow or hollow bodies to actually get in there and look at the pots myself. I'm not going to be messing with that. So we're going to skip that step, but just know going forward that if you were to do this on a Strat or a Telecaster or anything else where you have a little bit better access, that's something to be considered. All right. Now, I am a big fan of the Dario coated strings, but I am not a big fan of how they package their coated strings. I really actually like the Ernie Ball, like individual packets for each string. Um, I just find these to be a little bit more unwieldy. Plus, I never remember the color code, and there's always a way to tell, but it's just easier if you have the color code in front of you. So brass is the low E. And these are just 9x42s, so just something to know about. I used to actually play eights, and I was made fun of. No, I played eights for a while, but I found that they were just a little too thin for my liking, so I went with nines instead. But you play the string gauge that you prefer. A lot of people think that it's in order to get good tone, you need to play heavier strings. I have not found that to be the case, but your mileage may vary. Everything is restrung. That was painful. Probably gets easier as you get used to it, but for someone who's never restrung a Bigsby before, I can tell you that maybe not the best guitar for someone who's never done a lot of restringing. So consider that if you've never bought a guitar before. So lastly, I'm just gonna clip the ends off of these strings. Now, back in my rock and roll days, we used to leave them dangling and figure we could always use them as a weapon if we had to poke somebody's eye out. Mostly just because we were too lazy to trim them. I used to use a pair of regular wire cutters, but I found that they're just too big and bulky. These little clippers are just much better for the job. They don't get in the way. I don't worry quite as much about accidentally scuffing the finish. They work a lot better. All right, so the last step is to lubricate the nut. It's pretty easy. Basically, this is, again, from Music Nomad. I really like their stuff. Hadn't used it before, and then I bought both this and the Fretboard conditioner, and I really like it. So you just squeeze a little blob of goop on the end of this little applicator wand, and then you loosen whatever string you're planning on attaching it to, pop it out of the nut slot, and just rub it on in there. Now this nut slot was disgusting, so I'm probably actually going to do a couple of applications. Like I said, whoever owned this before me, I think did the old pencil in the crease trick, which works for some places, but it's not great for Florida. So and with a guitar with such a steep break angle, you really want to make sure it's well lubricated. And you just do this for every single one. One of the things I like about doing it in this order also is it allows the string gauge, if you've changed gauges, like these went, I think, probably from 10s to 9s, it allows the neck to react a little bit before adjusting the truss rod. So, just spending that extra couple of minutes lubricating the nut slots while the neck adjusts to the different string tension might make. Maybe this is just anecdotal, but it just seems like it makes it a little bit less of a chore to have to keep adjusting the nut or keep adjusting the truss rod and then wait a little while and then adjust the truss rod and then wait a little while, blah blah blah. So just giving it that extra couple of minutes might make a difference. And like I said, I think whoever owned this guitar before me probably at least had a cursory understanding about guitar maintenance, because it appears that they at least changed the nut and attempted to do the graphite pencil trick. I kind of almost wish that wasn't out there on the internet, because it doesn't work everywhere, and in a state like Florida, it definitely doesn't work. So I think it gives people a bad idea that, oh, this is just a magic cure and it doesn't cost me anything because I just need a pencil. And that's not the case. And even with the lubricant and everything else, with such steep break angles across the nut on this guitar, I would not be surprised if it still has tuning issues if I use the Bigsby. That's just sort of the price you pay for a 3x3 headstock with steep break angles. It's actually one of the reasons Paul Reed Smith created the Paul Reed Smith. The PRS guitars, if you look at them, the break angle across the nut is much, much shallower, almost straight through. The two best, in my opinion, being Paul Reed Smith. Ernie Ball's is really good as well. And they have a 4x2 headstock. Actually, some of the Schechters also have that have a 3x3 headstock have a really good brake angle. And people don't talk about them all that often for whatever reason. But all right, so everything is restrung. As you can tell, I've left the truss rod cover off the guitar at the time for the time being, just so that as I tune this up and make adjustments, I can easily attack the truss rod issues. Okay, so you may remember me talking about using a capo as part of a guitar setup. I use it in two different spots. So first off, an easy way to tell if the action's off at the nut is to put a capo on the 3rd fret, and then what you're looking for is just a tiny bit of wiggle room between the strings and the 1st fret. And yeah, you can do this by putting your finger down and then tapping. But I like the capo because it's more uniform pressure. So this way you'll always know if it's right or wrong, because on every guitar the pressure will be right, exactly the same. And this guitar's nut looks like it's cut perfectly. All right, so the next part where I'll use the capo, I'll put it on the 1st fret. I'll put my finger down on the last fret, and then right around the middle of the fretboard, I'll tap. So this guitar has just a little bit too much neck relief. And what that means is the neck is bowed just a little more than I like, although it's not too bad. I tend to like it a little bit closer than that, but it's not bad at all. So there's 3 places on a guitar that you can adjust the action: the bridge, the neck relief, and the nut. So far, the nut looked pretty good. The bridge looks good. If I do the same thing at the capo, and I look up here on, say, 12 or 15, you can hear it's making a note when you tap. It's not just, if it were a totally dead sound, if it didn't make any noise, it would be like the bridge needed to be raised a little bit. In this case, it looks like the bridge is in good shape. So the neck probably could stand to be some relief pulled out of it. And that's actually to be expected. And yeah, I can see it's got a little bit of relief. I like my necks actually pretty straight. All right, so being a Fender product, hopefully, yes, Gretsch is owned by Fender if you didn't know that. Hopefully it uses the same size wrench. So everything looks good on the action, except for, like I said, there's a little bit of a back bow, or there's a little bit of a bow. Not a back bow. A back bow would be this. This has just got a little bit too much relief this way. So it's just a little bit too much bow or relief. So in this case, it's going to be righty-tighty, lefty-loosey. So I need to tighten the truss rod. So righty-tighty. And literally just a quarter of a turn. That's it. A quarter of a turn. And then we're going to retune. And we're going to wait a few minutes to see if that made a difference. All right, yeah, that quarter of a turn looks like it did exactly what I needed it to do. So let's just take a quick look and see. Yep, now the action is basically perfect. So the last step would be, on a tune-o-matic bridge, it's really easy. You're basically just going to adjust these 2 set screws to raise and lower the bridge. But in a general case, if it's a Stratocaster, you have the individual hex heads. If you want me to do a Stratocaster setup, go ahead and say that down in the description down below in the comments. I will do that if enough people say yes, please. With that being said, that is about all I'll do on this guitar for it to be played. All right, so the guitar is all set up and ready to play. Like I said, stay tuned for a full review on the Gretsch, along with lots of other reviews coming up. I hope you have been enjoying the videos I've been producing. Been trying to keep it a little different each time. We're looking forward to doing quite a lot of different electronics reviews coming up. I have the Ampero 2 that I've been teasing as far as a review that's also coming. Lots more things on the horizon, so I look forward to talking with each of you. If you've enjoyed the content that I've been producing, please consider liking. Comment down below. Your comments really are a driver of me doing this work. Each video does take quite a bit of effort, and hearing your comments, your feedback really does keep the fires burning. So please comment below, ring the bell to get notified. I'm producing a lot of content these days, and I don't want you to miss anything. Please consider sharing if you think this would help anybody that you know. If a loved one is just getting into guitar, consider sharing the videos with anybody that might find them useful. And like always, thank you once again for tuning in, and I'll see you next time.